Happy Talking Tuesday of Penn State Week. That is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. This is the Podcast Daily, and we are ramped up. One of the biggest games of the college football season, and that is no hyperbole. That is not sarcasm. That is not tongue-in-cheek. This is a noon game in the horseshoe between two undefeated programs that actually really, really matters.
He means it, folks. He means it this time, I promise.
Penn State, Ohio State. I can't wait. I mean, it just, I don't know, Bill. It just feels different this week.
A lot of weight to this one, right? It's always a game that I think gets you on edge a little bit, especially when Ohio State has to go to Penn State because it's like, oh, what's going to happen in the whiteout game there? But even this besides that, thank God we're not getting that this year. This feels huge. This is trying to think like a handful of games that have felt like this in my time covering Ohio State. It's like clearly the 2-3 Michigan game. And maybe this, I think the Michigan game later this year will feel different, obviously, and more elevated than this one. But this is a monster coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why there were so many people that were kind of upset about in the Flex Premium Plus Pro family plan in the Big Ten that Penn State wasn't protected as a game because they've been so significant and they've been so meaningful. Like, if you make the list, and maybe we should have done that, of those – the 10 years that you've been covering the team and the 12 for me, like, it feels like there's a disproportionate amount of Ohio State Penn State games that, setting aside the rivalry implications, have had maybe more Big Ten implications, national championship implications, division race, stakes. These two teams have played a lot of really high stakes games of consequence, and they've been, for the most part, they've lived up to the billing, which is what adds to it.
Right, and I think this one will too. And part of the dynamic in some of those years is when those teams get together, it's often the first time that either of them is tested. Now, that's not true of Ohio State this year, obviously. It is true of Penn State, but I think that heightens the intrigue even more because I think I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people picking Penn State to win this game, but I think there's probably even a greater number of people who are still wondering what Penn State is. And maybe they feel like they have a beat on what Ohio State is. I don't know if that read would be accurate either, but it's a game that's going to tell us a lot about both teams, just sort of regardless of the Big Ten stakes. Like, these are two of the best teams in the country, and we're going to learn a whole lot about both of them.
All right, what are we going to learn later on Tuesday in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center? Ryan Day and Jim Knowles back. Always great to get your questions because I wrote down 5 on Monday, and I probably could have wrote 50 more.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into. The first on the docket, I guess, has to be the injury stuff, although that could be a waste of time for everybody. not to get you wound
let somebody else do that.
Yeah, not to get you wound up about that already. But that we have to get some sort of lean from Ryan Day if he's willing to give one on maybe Emeka Ibuka first and Denzel Burke second, 1A, 1B, then Travion Henderson, and what's his status. So that's one thing, right? We don't need to belabor the point on how Ohio State handles injuries. Stepping beyond that, even if Ryan Day were generous enough to provide us an update on Travion Henderson and say whether or not they think he's going to play this week, we need to get into the Dallin Hayden stuff now, right? Like, I thought his answers to the questions about Dallin Hayden after the Purdue game were interesting. Like, oh, we got to rethink that now. And I thought it was very funny. To say he's at his best with the ball in his hands about a running back is a very very funny way to analyze that position. It's like, well, I would hope so.
It's like everything he says is always in the back of his mind. Like, he's just hinting at fumbles in practice. Even when he says that, it's like, what does he mean? Well, he means he fumbles in practice. But, like, he has never done it in a game. I talked to multiple people before and after the game on Saturday that was like, I mean, until he does it in a game, like, you have to give him maybe the benefit of the doubt. But I understand why you don't want to if you see it on the practice field anyway.
Yeah, but also last year when we asked him, like, do you mean he fumbles? And he's like, oh, no, that's not what I mean by that. So I don't know. If that is the case, like, I get the trepidation with it. But I think we're past that. I think Dallin Hayden needs to be some part of the plan here moving forward. So that is question number 1 on my mind. If we get the injury stuff out of the way, it's like, what did you think of Dallin? How does it change the plan? If you're going to use him, like, what does that look like in a world where, let's assume you have 4 healthy running backs at your disposal? Like, how do you work that?
Yeah, the timing of it was also just wild. That last week was the week that he talked specifically about Dallin Hayden. Here's the plan. It's 4 games in the red shirt. Like, you have to just set that plan on fire. Like, even if all 4 are fully healthy and you are Ryan Day or Tony Alford and you think that he's 4th, he still adds something. It's clear every time he's been on the field. Last year, they kind of brushed it aside and the circumstances and the opponents, and they didn't want to put him in that situation against Michigan, and they didn't. But, man, that second half against Maryland, more than any of the others, is hard to shake. And then to go do that again, now you can say 11 carries and 73 yards. It's not the most statistically productive outburst of all time. But this offensive line is different, and I thought he was maximizing the way that it was blocked up, which wasn't bad, wasn't as elite as maybe it could have been a year ago when he was taking advantage of 3 NFL offensive linemen and Maryland's defensive front. Like, if you want to grade it on a different scale, I can sort of understand why. But it just, to me, it looks and feels different the way that he is reading what's blocked and then attacking it immediately. Like, I've used that word over and over, the decisiveness. Like, that to me stands out more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think you might sacrifice some explosive potential, right, when you play Dallin Hayden. Like, he's not the most fleet of foot guy in the open field. Not that he's slow. He's got plenty of speed. He's got enough speed. He doesn't have maybe as much speed as Travion or probably Chip. I'd be curious, actually, if he's faster than Mayan. I wouldn't be surprised if even Mayan had, like, a better 40 time than Dallin does. So, but I'm like, okay with that. And I thought, too, you saw he talked to us, I can't remember if it was a spring or in the summer, about, like, adding more weight because he felt like he needed to be bigger to be a guy who's relied upon in the Big Ten for double-digit carries a game, even if it didn't come his way. Like, eventually he wanted to get there. Mm-hmm. And I thought we saw that on his touchdown run. Like, he kind of got hit at the line of scrimmage and, like, drove his legs and got himself over the goal line. So, like, he's added to his game a little bit too. So I just think there's room for him. Like, I don't know that I'm here to have the conversation that, like, Dallin Hayden is definitely their best running back, because I think it's too nuanced to say that because they all kind of bring different things to the table. But I do think he should be part of the plan, clearly. In a world where they don't have a dominant number one running back, and that's okay, why not use all the guys you have at your disposal, especially when they bring something different to the table?
Yeah, I think my hindsight 2020 perspective of this now that we saw him do it again against Purdue, it's like, well, why didn't you try and find out if he could have been the starter or an every down back previous to this? Because it doesn't compute in my brain that he could be struggling that much in practice that you didn't want to at least see it against Western Kentucky or Youngstown to make an evaluation for a game like this. Like, now you just have the one game body of work and, barely over double-digit carries for the season. And again, you're not going to just elevate him past a healthy Travion or Chip based on what they've done to this point, because there's not a body of work to support that. I'm just more wondering why there wasn't an opportunity to evaluate that more in September when you had a chance, and they just didn't do it because of preserving a year of eligibility. Like, for what? Dallin Hayden was never going to be staying for 5 years.
Right. Yeah, I don't know why 2026 was ever on anyone's mind in evaluating the running back room. That is, and I said this to Doug on the postgame show. Like, I should have followed up when Ryan Day said that. Like, what do you mean you're for what?
Yeah, for who?
For who? For what?
Like, Ohio State wouldn't want it in 2026. Dallin Hayden doesn't want it.
Yeah, so that's odd, and hopefully this puts us past that. Like, we'll see. Like, I think you're right. If the hit that Chip took was nasty. Like, I don't know that.
I saw it coming. He was running towards the press box seat, and there were two guys there. And I mentioned this to people afterwards. I was like, "Can you just tell him to get down? Like, you're already got two guys banged up. Like, you could." Before it happened, I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah, and it was bad. Like, Marvin Harrison's reaction to it was as it happened. So we'll see what his availability is. If they are a healthy room or relatively healthy room, I think it makes sense to balance out those touches. But if they're not, and you don't have Chip or maybe you don't have Mayan, we don't know what's up with him. I think Dallin showed you that he's deserving of a handful or perhaps more of touches in this offense moving forward.
All right, where else are you going to
go? We saw a little bit of slot Marv against Purdue, and obviously that is a byproduct of Emeka Egbuka not being available. There was an uptick in snaps from the slot last week. There was this past week as well. So 2 weeks in a row where that number's been a little higher. The first touchdown he scored was out of the slot. And it's maybe just beyond the pure number of snaps in the slot is hard to say. I feel like they've been moving him around more. We saw the plays with motion with Marv last week. They got him in the space quickly, and I just thought it was a really good plan to utilize him on a day where he's probably going to see increased attention because Emeka Egbuka didn't play. Mm-hmm. And I thought it worked really well. And I'm just kind of curious where they are with making him the focal point of the offense, because there have been some games this year where teams have like quote unquote taken him away a little bit. I also don't feel like in those games that Ohio State did enough to combat that. They just sort of like put him out where they put him out, and if teams doubled him, well, the ball went somewhere else, which is fine. Like, it's not like their passing offense has been bad because of that, but he is the best receiver in the country, and they should use him as such. And I've found it encouraging the last 2 weeks that they've done that. I've seen some stuff from like some more like national coverage is like, oh, their offense is just throw the ball to Marv. Like, yeah, it should be.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, why wouldn't it?
Is there a coach in the country who'd be like, no, that's a terrible idea?
Yeah, I think it's
overuse Marvin Harrison. No, thank you.
It feels like a winning proposition to me. So I would like to ask Ryan Day maybe like about that evolving thought process of ways to use Marvin, because I do feel like it's been different the last 2 weeks.
I think they've also done a good job of incorporating Xavier Johnson into that without it being like obvious where it's going to go, and like actually letting him do receiver things. Now, he did not adjust well or track that one deep shot on Kyle McCord, like, spinning out of the pressure. Like, that was a hell of a play by McCord there, and showing some of that athleticism that, people wondered if he could do that stuff, and he did it. And then he put that ball, I thought, where it needed to be. And so Xavier didn't have a perfect game by any stretch, but I'm only bringing up the one slight negative as a point that the rest was really positive, and he does change the game. They're asking him to do a lot of different things, and maybe they'll have to do that again, depending on what happens with the Emeka Egbuka's status this week.
Yeah, that was a good performance from Xavier. That the drop was a little bit of a bummer, because like it would have been a really nice kind of cherry on top of what I thought was a great game, because it was a great play by Kyle. But you're not going to fault the guy for one drop, I guess. It's football is not easy. It was as Berm said, it was a little moist in West Lafayette, so maybe it was more difficult to catch those balls.
I'm glad he didn't use that word on Saturday.
He used it a lot on the daily on Monday.
It's super uncomfortable.
Made me uncomfortable as well. Thank you for those of you who still tuned in and kept watching even after he said it.
Yeah, more than once.
Yeah.
Kudos to you. You guys are the real MVPs. All right, so you're looking at slot Marv.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at the running game.
Yeah.
What else?
Is this like a gap scheme run team now? I'm hesitant to wrap my arms around that idea, although I think some other people who have like kind of cataloged Ohio State's run game this year have noticed that they are better when they run those pin and pull plays. And we saw, I don't know what it was, I think it was like 9 or 10 of them against Purdue, and they all looked really good. I think with the exception of one went for a loss. The others were all like at least, I think, 7 yards, and a couple of them were like 17, 18, 19-yard gains. They looked excellent against Purdue. Now, Purdue's defensive structure / their just sort of ability allows you to do that, I think, at a pretty good clip. So part of that is game plan specific. But I think we have enough evidence now throughout the season that they are, I think, just better at doing that stuff. And I thought the offensive line looked comfortable. I thought that was the most physical they've played all year. And if they were talking about simplifying schemes and finding the things that group does best, it seemed to me like they landed on it against Purdue. I wonder if the coaching staff feels the same way, or if that was just like, hey, this works against Purdue, but we're going to go back to doing our old stuff when we play everybody else.
It's weird. It's weird to evaluate, and this is the reminder that I give myself, at least. Like, every week is going to be different, so they emphasize playing more physically and maybe changing some of the schematic approach. Justin Fry talked about that on Wednesday of last week, and then they went out and I thought they had a more productive run blocking outing, and then the pass blocking took maybe a slight step back throughout. Like, you're not going to get everything perfect, and the long, held coaching axiom is that you get what you emphasize. And last week it was getting better running the ball, and then they did that. But like, to me, I still feel like this game on Saturday against Penn State is going to be won by Ohio State's passing attack and Kyle McCord and having time in the pocket, because Penn State, for whatever, no matter who they've played, and it hasn't been elite competition, they've been getting after the quarterback more than anybody else in the Big Ten, and they're one of the most pressure-packed units in the country. So know that that's going to happen, and that Manny Diaz is going to bring up a lot of blitz pressure, and he thinks they've got them figured out. Like, that's, so you got a little bit of improvement there with what you wanted to see on the run blocking, but now you got to do the same thing this week and make sure the protection is as sharp as it needs to be.
Yeah, I thought Purdue blitzed them a lot. And Penn State will blitz them a lot. It's like what Manny Diaz does. Someone of our texters asked, like, hey, do you think Penn State might blitz less because Kyle threw the ball pretty well against the blitz against Purdue? And I think no, because that would be Manny Diaz pivoting
character,
from what I think he wants to do. So they're a team that blitzes like 50% of the time, 60% of the time. If you look back through their games this year, I think you're going to see that again. They're going to want to stress test that offensive line of Ohio State to see if they can handle it. And Ohio State will have to find a way, I think, to create some explosive plays. Like that is a difference between Ohio State and Penn State. Is Ohio State, even for all of its like inconsistencies at times on offense, has still managed to find a way to be explosive more often than not. And Penn State just has not been at all in any of the games they've played. So that I think could be a differentiating factor between these two teams, as long as the offensive line can hold up well enough to give Kyle McCord and those receivers time to make a few plays downfield.
After you and Jim Knowles talk about the Birds.
No, we're talking about the Phils. We're
past that?
The Birds lost.
That's over?
Yeah, we're on to the Phillies.
On to the Phils? Okay. He never talks about the Phillies. He talks about the Birds a lot, though. His local football team, he likes to call them.
That's right. I wonder if maybe I'll wear my Phillies hat and see if he gives me a wink or something.
That's the test.
Yeah.
After game one on Monday night, which was a game.
It was good or bad. I don't know.
It was a great game.
Yeah.
Of baseball. Then what will you talk about?
What you wrote about in your questions, like what's going on with Steel Chambers and Cody Simon and how is that evolving? Because it felt like against Maryland, it was like, oh, these guys are kind of viewed similarly. It felt like against Purdue to me, it's like, I think they like Cody a little more now. So like now where does that leave them going into a Penn State game where Penn State, I think, is going to try to run the ball in this game. Like they have two really good running backs. They have a better offensive line than they typically have. I think they're going to want to protect Drew Aller on the road and in front of a crowd that's going to really get after a kid from the state of Ohio playing in the shoe for the first time. Mm-hmm. That probably lends itself to playing Cody Simon a little more. Like even if Steele starts, which that might be the case, I don't particularly care about that. It could be a game where they play them both. Like for all I know,
it did happen some in the fourth quarter, but that was resting Tommy, I imagine.
Yeah, but I think it's pretty clear that Cody is seeing things in the run game a little better than Steele at the moment. So where does Jim Knowles see that now as it continues to evolve?
Yeah, and that seems like it's going to be really important against this Penn State offense, which has no explosive ability really whatsoever and is not stressing teams down the field. But they can run the ball consistently, and they can eat up the clock, which you have to imagine that's the blueprint that every team has tried to use against Ohio State. Penn State and Michigan are both more than capable of doing that to Ohio State. So if that's the case, and again, you take the PFF grades with as much grain of salt as you want, definitely on Saturday that favored Cody by a decently wide margin. The snap count wound up being 13 more reps in favor of Cody Simon than Steel Chambers on Saturday. So again, as you're saying, it may not matter who starts. If over the course of the game, who's going to be relied on more. I think that Ohio State is clearly trending towards this point being a Cody Simon. And I said last week on Friday's Daily with the bold predictions, like I thought Steele would come out of it. He recognized that there had been some weaknesses in the game for the linebackers and himself, and that they were going to get better. And his body of work, you think for sure, like he's played at a really high level. At some point, he's going to again, but you can't wait forever, and
right. Yeah.
And you can't drag your feet in a game like this against Penn State either. So whoever is the hot hand, and right now it seems to be Cody Simon, that's what you're going to have to do. And it does seem to me as well that Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis are willing to make that move pretty quickly.
Clearly, yeah, which I would not have assumed coming into the year because that wasn't really their MO last year. I think they're still going to need both of them, right? And you're right. Like I kind of felt like too, like some of the stuff that Steele was saying, like he was going to snap out of that quickly. Sometimes that takes a little bit, and maybe that happens for him this week. Like he's made some big plays for this defense over the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's certainly capable of it. And he could very well do it this week. And even maybe the rise of Cody Simon and sharing that workload a little more is something that can light a little bit of a fire under Steele too, and get some better play out of him. Like I don't think he's been terrible. He's been not as good as he usually is, but it's noticeable because he has been so good for this defense. And same thing with Tommy. Like when Tommy's had a couple of off games, I thought he had a nice bounce back last week and played a little better. So they just need that position to play well. I think whoever it is, like clearly it's going to be Tommy, and whether it's Steele and Cody splitting it or 70-30 Steele, whatever it is, like that group needs to play its best game of the year on Saturday because of the way Penn State runs the football, and because too they are not afraid to target the running backs and the tight ends in the passing game too, which I think could stress the linebackers out a little bit too. So they got to get it figured out what the right personnel mix is, but then whoever it is, that group needs to play its best game of the year.
So this is tied up to obviously Denzel Burke's injury status moving forward this week, but I know you and I were talking about that, live on Saturday in Slack. Like, well, Davison's going over to replace Denzel Burke. He's playing in the boundary. They had both Jordan Hancock and Jermaine Matthews getting some look there to the field. I think you'd have to assume that's what they would do if Denzel Burke is unavailable. If he is, I think that's a really big deal. I mean, I can't say enough. I've thought so highly of the way Denzel Burke has played like that. That changes things. But at the same time, like Drew Aller has not proven that he can take advantage of that opportunity. So I don't know, did you feel like you saw enough late to evaluate that or not?
Yeah, I mean, Purdue tried to attack Davis and Igwinoson when he moved to that boundary corner spot. I thought he had pretty good coverage more often than not. He got beat earlier in the game, or no, I guess it was prior to the injury or after the injury when he got beat for that touchdown. I can't remember. Doesn't really matter. I think they're okay there. Penn State, if they were playing a different team with better receivers, maybe I'd feel differently. But Penn State this year just has not been super dynamic at receiver. They have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's been pretty productive. I think I probably trust either Jordan Hancock or Davis Igwinoson to cover him for the majority of a game. And I'm intrigued by the emergence of Jermaine Matthews, too. So obviously you want Denzel Burke in there. It's not even for how well he's playing. I just think like he is a leader of that defense, or you want his presence on the field to help you work through some stuff because you're going to encounter some adversity in this game. Penn State's a good team. So not having that presence on the field, I think, matters tremendously, perhaps as much as like not having a guy who like shuts down his side of the field as a cornerback. So we'll have to see how that develops. But I'm simultaneously like bullish on that position group's ability to overcome that loss. Maybe naively so, but I think they're pretty good. So I think they'll be all right.
All right. Anything else?
No, I think those are the big spots, like linebacker and corner. I found what you said about Katie McDonald was it in the notebook or Snap Judgments about him like making a little push here interesting. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is a game where you see a lot of him, but maybe that's a down the road question for Jim Knowles. Like, what do you think of what you've seen from him?
Yeah, it seems to be pushing. It was a name that came up before the game even started. It was mentioned to me that there was a lot of excitement building for what he was doing, and I was like, well, what do you just for down the road, like next year? And it was like, well, he played today. He's out there making an impact. I think 12, 13 snaps I think he finished with, which I would not have projected even after I was told, hey, keep an eye on this guy.
Like, yeah, he ran onto the field. I was like, who's 56? You're like, it's Kaden McDonald. I was like, oh.
Yeah, here you go. Get ready for that. So, I mean, that's another part. Like, Ohio State has been willing to look at guys. We know that Larry Johnson is going to rotate, especially with those defensive tackles. So, this Penn State rushing attack, like, that's going to be the test. And if you don't want Tyleek to play 75 snaps, Mike Hall to play 65 snaps, like, there are going to have to be some other guys who can step up and play at that level, because that's really the only way that you can rotate against a team like this in a game like this. They have to be playing at the same level of the starters, because one drive can make the difference in this game.
It sure can. And Penn State has run a lot of plays this year. They ran more than 90 against Delaware and UMass, which like I get, maybe put that aside, but they've had I think 3 other games
because they can't get any explosives.
Yeah, they've had 3 other games where I think they've run north of 70. But you're right, it's a product of them not being particularly explosive, but they hold on to the ball a long time too. So like the defense, even if I think the defense is going to play well and keep Penn State off the board for the most part, I think they could be on the field for quite a bit of this chunk of this game.
All right, so the urgency and intensity will again ramp up as Ohio State gets on the practice field on Tuesday, and then they have Ryan Day's weekly press conference with Jim Knowles. We're looking forward to that. We'll have full coverage of that. We'll stream it. We'll have some snap judgments later on. We'll break it all down for you as we always do on the podcast. We appreciate you starting this Tuesday with us on the Podcast Daily to talk it all out. That's Bill Landis, and I'm Austin Ward. We'll see y'all later.